Welcome to Tanakh Talk. I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting live from Kingsland, Texas, USA, with another episode of Monday Memoirs, replacing Testimonial Tuesdays from way back. Today you're going to hear the story of an ex-pastor, Holly Sortland. So you guys, welcome to the studio, almost. Holly, thank you for joining us here. It's always a pleasure for sure. Thank you so much for your time and your flexibility, of course, as well. We started this plan earlier, and we were going to do it last week. And as it turned out, I had a conflict in my schedule, and I couldn't pull it off. And so thanks to your flexibility, here we are. Thank you so much, Holly.
Yeah, it's no problem. I have 4 kids, so I have to be flexible. Yes, so I totally get it.
That's great. That's great. So the cool thing is, pardon me, my hat got in the way of moving the microphone out of the way so I had to cough in your ear. I apologize. So all of y'all's. So the cool thing about this is we're going back to my old format here. Number one, I don't know anything about your testimony because we didn't talk about it. So that's why I have Julie on the scene. She's going to take care of kind of prepping everybody, and I don't want her to tell me because I want to have that same level of first experience excitement about what I'm hearing as the viewer does. So it's kind of cheating her from that joy, but that's okay. She doesn't mind. So
poor Julie.
Yeah, she's so awesome. Anyway, so here we go. All right. So again, welcome to the show, and for all of you who are tuning in for the first time for the Monday Memoirs, this particular set of shows is specifically designed not just for people who have left Christianity and moved into studying Torah Judaism, but specifically those who were pastors, preachers, or preachers' wives, preachers' kids, people who were really like neck deep, not knee deep, but neck deep in their studies and their theology. And maybe I've actually had a few people on who were going to school, actually going to college to seminary to actually become a preacher, and then that's when they came out as well. So, but that's generally the idea. So if you do happen to reach out and you want to share your testimony, I'll get you set up with Julie M. Taylor on Facebook. She'll be the one to reach out to, and then just tell her your story. And if it kind of fits what she knows we've talked about, then we'll put you in line, which is how we kind of ran into you, I believe. Is that not right?
Yeah, exactly. So
very cool. So let's get into this thing. So you were an ex-pastor.
Yeah, until a week ago.
Wow.
Well, actually, I've been. So I was a pastor in the United Methodist Church. A year ago, I was actually very close to taking a step called being commissioned to be ordained in the United Methodist Church. So I was in the middle of finishing my master's in divinity, which I dropped out of, and a big the change sort of happened within me, I would say, about when I went to Israel last year, and that had a huge impact on my thinking. But then it would have been probably this winter, I just had this epiphany, and I started listening to Rabbi. I found your show, which was amazing, and I started reading, and and it just sort of things started happening.
That's so cool. So what's really cool for me now is because my sweet sister-in-law, her entire family are all Methodist, and we don't talk religion when they're here. We just do family stuff. But she's very well aware of the channel. She's my brother, however, who is her spouse, is right on track, pretty much with where we're at for the most part. He definitely knows there's issues with Christianity, but because of the marriage, they have to stay, keeping the peace, so they don't do as much studying as they do just kind of like chilling. Right. But the fact that you were a Methodist preacher, and that's her whole family line of things, that's going to be very interesting for her later on when I am going to share her. Doreen, love you, sis, but you're getting this video. So where how did religion fit in your family's life when you were young?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I grew up in western South Dakota, so I'm near Mount Rushmore, if you're familiar with Mount Rushmore. The city I live in is South Dakota is about 800,000 people, so it's like 2 blocks of Manhattan. But I grew up in a very I would say secular household. My dad was terminally ill when we grew up, and so we really didn't go out much as a family. He was very agnostic. He had a lot of problems with how like the Catholics and organized religion, what they did to the Native American people, the Lakota, in boarding schools and stripped away their culture. My mom had us baptized as United Methodist, and she was raised in the United Methodist Church, and she wanted us to go to church, but it just never happened. I think we went on Christmas Eve. I have memories of going on Christmas Eve. But then I ended up going to a Lutheran private college, which I'm still paying off 22 years later. Anyway, and it was mandatory that we had to do some theological study there. But oddly enough, even though I grew up very in a household that was pretty secular, when I was a high schooler, I was very drawn to Judaism. And I didn't know it at the time, but I was actually dating a boy who I just recently found out was Jewish. And we never talked about him being Jewish. But it was weird how it all worked out. But so, and then after we adopted our first son, and we were living in California at the time. And then 2 weeks later, I found out I was pregnant with our second son. And, I think a lot of people, once they start having a family, they feel like they need to have a, religion in their life. And so I was actually drawn to the United Methodist Church because of their social justice policies. I was attracted to them because they were big on the idea of grace, and they weren't like, how do I say it? Like, I've always been turned off by kind of the evangelical wing of Christianity.
Gotcha.
And I really struggled with that even as I went into seminary, because there are some Methodists, just like any denomination, you have some liberal and then you have some that are very, very conservative. But I think Rabbi Singer a week ago on the show said that, the majority of people who end up following Judaism or become a Noahide leave Christianity when it's really that often extreme Christianity. And he said, I remember him saying, it's not usually your like Hillary Clinton types he said, I think maybe 10%, and I probably fall into that 10%.
Right. Wow.
Yeah. So
that makes sense. My first question that sticks with me right now, and like again, for all you viewers out there, I've tried doing these interviews both ways, based on suggestions from the viewers. One was to just kind of stay loose and just kind of go with the flow, and the other one was we want it more structured. So I was doing it one way, and then I got the other recommendations, so we did that. And then after we did that for a while, I started getting complaints about being too structured. So now I'm just going to say, forget the emails. I'm just going to do it the way it feels good. And basically what's going to happen is that as she talks, it's going to trigger a question, and that's the question that's going to come out. So with that said, you're before you left, like when you first stumbled onto Tanakh Talk or Rabbi Tovia Singer, and you heard the first thing, your initial gut feeling was like, no way, that's totally not true. So what do you remember what it was and what you tried to use to rebuttal that with? Right. So for me, for example, it was I actually had a situation with forgiveness and with King David and with human sacrifice. Right. And I was arguing the whole thing with David lost his son because of sin. So there you go. Now, I didn't understand it at the time, but that's what I was using. So what example did you experience on your first encounter with a counter missionary and your rebuttal argument in your mind?
I'm probably going to disappoint you with this answer.
That's okay. Doesn't matter.
Well, I always struggled, and this is even as a pastor, leading a congregation and burying people and baptizing people. I have always struggled with the virgin birth narrative in my mind.
Nice.
I've always thought that it had, the echoes of Greek mythology.
Wow.
And then I've always struggled with the idea of the resurrection. And there's actually a guy named, he wrote a translation of the Bible called The Message translation. His name's Eugene Peterson, and he died a couple of years ago. And he belonged to this group called the Jesus Seminar, and they called themselves Christians, but they didn't necessarily believe in the resurrection. And I don't know, so I didn't really, it was weird because when I found Tanakh Talk and when I heard like Rabbi Singer and Rabbi Federer talk, it was almost like they were telling me, answering questions that I had about my faith and steering me like home, if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have a bit of an advantage in that I wasn't indoctrinated as a kid. I think that makes a huge difference, what you're told as a kid. And I was really kind of taught to question by my father. So there wasn't, whenever I'd hear, like for instance, I remember one of the first things was about the virgin narrative. And then I went back and I started reading in Isaiah and I was like, and if you look at it, it never says virgin really. It says, young maiden. And I started looking at how the scripture was just twisted to meet, the agenda of the New Testament or the agenda of what Paul said.
So you had some freedom in your studies because you didn't have people telling you even as you were studying how to believe because you were already a free thinker from the beginning. You weren't groomed into right.
Yeah. Although I do have and I have some wonderful family members. I love them dearly, but I have my sister-in-law is very, very evangelical, and I recently wrote a book, and it says on the back that I'm converting to Judaism, and she immediately messaged me, and I think she's like, well, so she wanted to know right away. She's like, so do you still believe that Jesus is the Messiah? And I didn't give her a straight answer because I didn't just want, I didn't want a big debate to happen. And then she said, well, my pastor's a Messianic Jew. You should talk to him. And I was like, oh, I know all about that. So no, it's okay. I'll take a pass. And I told her I said, you should watch some Tovia Singer. And I don't know if she has or not. But it was amazing. And I guess frustrating. Like I felt duped. And I think I like to think I'm an intelligent person. And so, anybody who actually goes back and you look at the original, Hebrew and the Old Testaments and the prophets, and it's totally twisted and put, agendas behind it and then the New Testament. And so I'm kind of in this phase now where I'm a little angry at myself.
Right.
For if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. And earlier you mentioned about a book. So guys, she has a blog and at a website as well. So her email address is on your screen. TheGerragirl, I love that email address. TheGerragirl@gmail.com, and a blog where you can locate her book and anything about the book. You can just reach out to her. I've not read the book. I've not been to the website. I just know I like the name of your website. So if you have any questions about her book, just go to her website, reach out to her via email, and she'll be glad to answer you there. So carrying on. So how long, how old were you when you felt the calling to go into ministry?
Oh, it was interesting because when I was in college, I think it was my sophomore or junior year, I remember we were going around the room and telling each, we were saying our majors. And there was a guy in my class, and this was in one of my theology classes, and he was going to be a youth pastor. And I was like, oh, that sounds cool, but I was like, nah. And I had this just stereotype in my mind at the time of Christians as being very closed-minded and judgmental. But there was a little spark in me that went off at that time. And then when I was in my early 30s, I had started a nonprofit organization for at-risk youth here in the city that I live. I was attending a United Methodist Church, and I was offered to become the youth coordinator at this church. And also that would mean I'd have to teach confirmation. And I knew absolutely nothing about the Bible. I was just good with working with kids. So that's and
Gotcha.
So I
Right.
took this job knowing nothing about I couldn't even tell you how many books were in the Bible.
Right.
I could definitely not, like the Old Testament. Like I was like, somebody could say that Moses was a book and I'd believe it,
Right.
So, But so I started, it was kind of fun for me to learn, and then I was passionate about what I was learning. But the crazy thing was I was so messed up on the Gospels. I was like, these don't make sense. And then as I learned that like Mark was written first, and then it didn't even have a resurrection, it had this appendage years later. And it was very difficult for me to try to explain to the kids why the Gospels were so different.
So you knew about this before? How long did you know about that whole problem?
Well, just when I was studying it. So I was
Really,
probably,
that's cool.
yeah, I know. I was just like, well, why are even the synoptic gospels, why are they so different? Why? And I'd have mentors and pastors that would say, well, it's just, the book of Matthew was written for a Jewish audience. And,
yep.
So I was like, okay, I just took their word for it. But it was, and then another thing that was really, I'll never forget, it was a Wednesday night, and this girl just out of nowhere asked me, she's like, so what's the Trinity? And I could not for the life of me explain it. I was just like,
right.
And I mean, now I could, but at the time, it just made absolutely no sense, So she was like, so God died? So God died on the cross, but God can't die, right? And I was like...
And who was asking you this again?
Like a 12-year-old girl.
Oh, that's awesome. Wow. Now, see, that right there is amazing. Because, I mean, everybody always says, the whole thing, this thing is so simple that even a child can get it. I'm like, really? You ask a child without the parents' influence, you tell them to read this, they don't get it. Jesus' disciples didn't even get it. He wound up calling them, what are you guys, still blind? You don't get this? All right? So what's the deal?
Yeah. Yeah. And so that was another point for me where I was just very unsure. And then I remember I would help with vacation Bible schools, and I remember and I didn't run them or pick the curriculum, but I would help out. And I remember watching this video, and it was I think it was based on that year. It was like Mount Everest or something. So there are all these cute little animals in the video and mountain climbers, and then all of a sudden this goat appears, and he's like, and because of your terrible sins, Jesus had to die on the cross.
Wow.
And it was so to me shocking. And I was like, there's these 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds that are being told because of their terrible sins, this guy that they don't even know is getting put on a cross to die.
That's horrible.
And it just struck me so as harsh and wrong. And I remember one kid asked me this question, and he said, why is it such a big deal? He said, because all kinds of people die in horrible ways. He's like, so why is Jesus's death such a big deal? And so I gave him the typical, well, it was because it was a son of God. And he's like, why would God kill his own son? And, it's interesting that kids, sometimes I say from the mouth of babes, but they were kind of reiterating and challenging my own thinking.
Right. Wow. I see there's a lot of similarities with so many of us who, including my own testimony. I think I had the first testimony, right? A lot of the same struggles, different field, of course, like with yours with Methodist, and I was in the charismatic movement, with the whole interdenominational stuff. And but the things that you're telling me too, like right now, the stuff that you've been aware of early on, I think that's fascinating, because a lot of these things that you were aware of earlier, most people aren't finding out until they start to leave Christianity, and then they have the other people, the counter missionaries who are exposing this stuff, and that's where they hear it for the first time. So moving on with your motion. So how long ago because last week was your last? That's when you quit doing your teaching, right? Or you stopped being a preacher last weekend, pastor?
Yeah.
Or last week. So how long?
I preached from the Old Testament.
Cool. How long were you in this study phase of to the time you said, I'm out of here?
I'd say about a year. And during that time, 2019 was a really, really hard year. We had a lot of deaths in our congregation. It's an aging congregation, and dealing with death a lot is just, it gets to you. And then I also had the death of my first boy, kind of my high school love, he died from complications of a skydiving accident. He was the one who was Jewish, and I didn't know it. And he died, and then, but I had this trip and then I also got diagnosed with late stage Lyme disease. It was just a really crappy year.
Right, gotcha.
But anyway, but I had this trip to Israel planned, and when I was there, I just can't. And I think people who have been there, you hear it all the time. Like, I don't know. I was expecting, and I've traveled before. I studied abroad in college and stuff, and so I was expecting like a sense of culture shock, but I didn't experience that there. And I went to many Christian sites, and I felt nothing. And where I felt the biggest spiritual feeling was at the temple, at the wall,
right.
The Western Wall. I mean, I just can't explain the feeling that I had there, and that kind of cemented it for me. And then also just meeting some Jewish people, and I don't know, it just felt like home. And so it was a struggle for me because I was kind of Methodist. We work on an appointment system. The bishop appoints you, and so I was kind of committed for a certain time period. But when I came back, I started, I really tried to avoid New Testament teaching and started pulling my scriptures from, like, I go to Chabad.org, to get the original Hebrew. And so I was doing a lot of Old Testament stuff because I just didn't feel genuine. I mean, it was a really hard position to be in. It was. I felt like a hypocrite. And I still do a bit. I'm still trying to, and then with my kids, I'm kind of struggling a little bit. My youngest, not so much because she's still pretty young, but my teens, I've had some good discussions with Rabbi Federo about, why I'm changing. And
he's watching now, by the way.
Oh, hi, Rabbi. Hello. So it's hard. I mean, because they grew up in the church, so that was their life. Like church, being in a church was like their second house.
How old are they now?
My oldest is 15, and then I have a 13, 11, and 7.
Gotcha. Wow. That's very. I could see how that would be a little complicated. My oldest young teen is 16 now, but they were only like 9. 7 and 9 whenever we started coming out. So they've been out for quite some time. I could imagine if I had to tell them now, after being involved in the church for 16 years, that could be tricky, to say the least. Unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, just letting everybody know who's watching right now, if you guys have any questions that you would like to have asked, put them in the chats. I'm watching the chat as we go. So forgive me, Holly, but if I seem spaced out from moment to moment, it's because I'm kind of reading chat as you go along too. So
sure.
Okay. So if you guys would like to have a specific question, please put it there, and I will do my best to get it put out. But tag me, put on there Tanakh Talk, and then ask your question. Otherwise, I won't see it. Okay. So good deal. So your exit. What was it? What was the main thing? You mentioned it kind of already. Yeah, you already had years ago. You had issues with the whole virgin birth narrative and some other things. Was there something a year ago when this whole process began that triggered it the most?
Well, there were a couple things. The United Methodist Church right now is in the middle of a schism, which it means split over the issue of human sexuality, and like one thing that really frustrated me my entire time in ministry was the church treats local churches like corporate entities. So, it's like we treat people like customers and not like people. Like we have immediately after our worship ends, we get this email and it's like, how many people were in worship? How many people watched online during worship? How many people gave? And it's extremely competitive. And your rewards are given out for like the most baptisms and stuff like that. And it's
like a competition altogether.
Oh, absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely. And that's how they, and now it's even, churches are struggling big time because of COVID. But now it's like, well, how many people are watching you? So it's like a competition of you have to have the best staging. You have to be very attractional, and we were constantly giving trainings on how do you attract new people? How do you attract new people? And it was just so much consumption based to me and seemed inauthentic. And I really had problems with that. And also it was attracting the right people, people that had money.
Sorry about that. Let me turn this down. I apologize.
And not all churches are like that, and not all Methodist churches are like that. But that was just a feeling that I had that bothered me. And I was actually given. This is so strange because I felt my biggest weakness was evangelism. Like I could never be a person that could go up and be like, have you accepted Jesus into your heart?
Right.
If I had evangelized, it'd be more like God loves you, you're a beloved child of God. But yet I was actually given this prestigious award for evangelism because of working with impoverished people, like people that just were overlooked. I had started a special meal program, and we called it Waffle Church. And so anyway, I was given this award for that, and it was a different type of evangelism, I guess you could say. But that was one thing that really bothered me about the church, and I was just like, I can't continue this. And then just that I couldn't be in a position of being a licensed pastor, and especially going forward with being commissioned or ordained, and not believe in the resurrection. I mean, I can't say that it would be untruthful of me.
Right.
And so that was the other big decision that did it for me too. And just the stress of ministry. I mean, I don't think people realize the high rate of suicides, not just for pastors, but any religious leader. And, I'm sure any rabbi or, any religious leader can tell you, but, you're constantly having to please people, and being a woman, it's even more pressure. I mean, I get criticized for what I was wearing or what I wasn't wearing. And,
right.
If I changed my hair, it's just stuff like that.
Wow.
It was, yeah.
I could only imagine. Okay, so Janice Hart on YouTube asked, says, how did Holly's family deal with her no longer celebrating the Christian holidays? Now, granted, this is just happening, so do you have a plan? Or have you already? Sorry, that's tough.
Well, I told, my dad's passed. He's been dead for 20 years. My mom, when I told her that I was thinking about converting to Judaism, her response was, "What? That doesn't surprise me," because she said, "I thought you'd convert in high school when you were interested." But my sister-in-law and my sister, I know there's going to be some issues. And my kids, my 13-year-old, I get them mixed up. There's too many of them. My 13-year-old, he was like, "I don't want you to convert to Judaism, Mom, because we're going to be celebrating Christmas and you're going to be alone in the kitchen lighting a candle." And so that was before I had really explained things to them. So I haven't gotten there yet, but it's a good question. I mean, I don't know. And my husband's kind of midway on this journey too. He hasn't. He's fine with not attending church, but I think he's in a different spot when it comes to believing in Jesus than I am.
Right.
So that makes things complicated as well.
Right. Well, I guess in a way it's good that he's at least good with not attending, because that's half the battle. Well, maybe not half the battle, but that's a big portion of the battle there. And so it seems like with you continuing your studies outside of church and him knowing that you aren't making some vicarious, just a random decision like, "Hey, I'm on a whim, I'm going to go do something different now," and he knows that.
Right.
I think deep inside he's probably very worried about what he's been believing, and also maybe worried about you. But the point being, I think he also trusts your studies as well. You know what I mean? It sounds like he was supportive of you being a minister, pastor to begin with. So, okay, so my point to you would be to hang in there, because you're doing a great job. So, okay, Mike Lake asked, how did Now, you guys, keep in mind, she literally just came out last week, so she doesn't have a history of how she did things, but she probably has a game plan. So I'm gonna convert Mike Lake's question and instead, Holly, how do you plan on dealing with the loss of community? Do you have what's your planned approach for this, and how do you think that's going to impact you and your family?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I had actually posted in one of, I don't think it was maybe it was Tanakh Talk, that, I was in this covenant group. People who aren't Christian might not know, like covenant groups it kind of sounds, now I look back on it, it sounds a little creepy. But it's basically, it was a group of these women pastors, and we would just, you have this covenant that what stays, you can like share your deepest secrets and it's very confidential. And anyway.
So what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, basically.
Exactly. Right. But it was frustrating to me because when I told them that I was leaving Christianity and that I've had this draw towards Judaism, I got no response. And I told them, I was going to be leaving the group, and there was a couple of them that did respond, but a couple of them that it was hurtful because there wasn't any I wish you luck, or or even asking me why. So that was, and after being walking through them and then walking through with me during three years of some hardships, that hurt a little bit. You kind of learn who your new true friends are. I mean, there's a couple of pastors who know that I am on this walk, and they have been extremely supportive. Like in fact, my former interim supervisor, she was like, "Wow, I totally support your decision." And she's like, "Here's some great Jewish books on parenting that I read." So it was like, she's a keeper, and
nice.
But I think that I haven't really. Yeah, I'm still grappling with that. Definitely.
Gotcha. Right. Gotcha. So I guess we are kind of running out of time. I try to trim it to about a half an hour, about 32 minutes right now. But do you? What are your plans right now? And I realize it could be too early for anybody to decide. But do you plan on converting them? Is this something that's been a long ongoing pull for you, or do you plan just kind of just not worry about converting right now? Just keep studying until later and just see what unfolds. What's your goal?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So, no, I definitely want to convert. We have a one shul in our town. It's a reform shul. It's closed now because of COVID, but Rabbi Federer put me in touch with a program where you can start the conversion process online. I think it's called the Footsteps or Footpath, something like that. Anyway, so I'm going to start my studies officially in July. I'm definitely called. It's interesting. I had a talk with a couple of other folks a couple nights ago. It's just strange that I had this call to Judaism. In high school, I was dating a guy that was Jewish, didn't know it, and then had a call again. In college a little bit. I attended a synagogue once and I thought more about it. But I really believe that there's this Jewish soul within me that needs to find its way. And I think it's different for everyone. I think some people are just called to know the truth and live as a Noahide or just live by God's laws. But for me, I think my way is moving forward as a Jewish person.
Right. Very good. Well, I'll tell you what, I know there's everybody else who is watching has got lots of questions, and we'll never get them all fit into a 30-minute show. So again, on your screen, let me put that up one more time. You'll have Holly's email address and her blog address as well at thegergirl.com for the blog. You can also find out about her book there. And if you've got any questions that we didn't cover that you're really curious about, send it to her. thegergirl@gmail.com is on your screen. And so, wow. That was a nice little stick of dynamite, wasn't it?
Thank you for doing this, William. And I just want to say that I want to give a shout out to you because you probably don't remember because you get so many. But I think it was 9 or 10 months ago, I emailed you and you immediately like sent me links and put me into the Tanakh
Oh,
Talk group.
cool.
And if it wasn't for you, I don't think I would be where I was on my journey. So I just want to thank you for
Wow.
taking the time to do that. So
Thank you. Thank you very much. And you're very welcome. So, guys, thank you. And not only thank you so much. I'm sorry again you had to wait an extra week on this thing, but glad you
no,
came
it's
out.
fine.
Very, very good. So I look forward to hearing more about you as time goes on. We'll stay connected on Facebook, and you guys, she's also on Facebook too, Holly Sortland. You can send her a friend request there, and then and just kind of see where life goes, guys. So, but thank you all for tuning in. It's been a real pleasure. And Holly, for you, again, Godspeed to you, and just however you approach the study path and your choices, and Hashem should give you favor and speedy timing. So, thank you so much. I
Yeah,
appreciate it.
Baruch Hashem.
Baruch
Thank
Hashem.
you.
You bet. We'll see you. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
See you
Thanks,
guys.
William.
You betcha. Bye bye.
אני אתה אתם תמיד תמיד כולם ביחד חשוב מכל חשוב והכרחי להיות ביחד איפוק זו העוצמה ויתור זו הגדולה השאיפה והכמיהה אני אתה אתם תמיד תמיד כולם ביחד חשוב מכל חשוב והכרחי להיות ביחד איפוק זו העוצמה ויתור זו הגדולה השאיפה והכמיהה חושבים דוחים לובשים בכל האופנים
Whoops. Oh, did I disconnect too fast?
Oh no, you're good. You're good. Hang on, I'm trying to make sure this thing is stopping the way it should, and it did. Let me close this out. Oh yeah, so stop. Very good. 1 second. I got a little trigger happy, and when I clicked the button for it to stop, I clicked it twice, and I think it tried to restart again. So, but we got
Oh,
the
okay.
testimony